James had always been a dreamer. From a young age, he found solace in the vibrant strokes of his paintbrush and the endless possibilities of a blank canvas. Growing up in a small, underserved community, James learned to see beauty in the simplest of things: the worn-out sneakers of kids playing on the streets, the way sunlight bounced off cracked windows, and the colorful graffiti that adorned the neighborhood walls. His art was his voice, a medium through which he shared the stories of his people, their struggles, and their dreams. Despite his undeniable talent, James's journey was riddled with obstacles. As a black artist in a world that often dismissed him due to his background, he faced prejudice at every turn. Galleries in his city were dominated by established names, and opportunities for someone like him were few and far between. Yet, he poured his soul into his work, spending countless nights refining his craft. His apartment walls were covered in sketches and half-finished paintings, each one telling a story of resilience, hope, and cultural pride. One cold winter morning, James decided it was time to take a leap of faith. Clutching his carefully curated portfolio, he made his way to one of the most prestigious galleries in the city, Walsh & Company Art Gallery. Located in the heart of the upscale district, the gallery was known for showcasing elite artists and attracting affluent buyers. To James, it represented the pinnacle of success, a place where his art could finally receive the recognition it deserved. As he walked into the gallery, the air was thick with the scent of polished wood and expensive cologne. The walls were adorned with abstract pieces and minimalist sculptures, each bearing hefty price tags. James felt a pang of nervousness as he approached the front desk, where a young receptionist greeted him with a polite but distant smile. "I'm here to see Mr. Walsh," James said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'd like to show him my portfolio." The receptionist hesitated, her eyes scanning James's worn coat and weathered boots. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, her tone cautious. "No, but I was hoping he might have a few minutes to spare. My work is unique, and I believe it would fit well with the gallery's collection," James replied earnestly. Reluctantly, the receptionist made a quick phone call and gestured for James to wait. A few moments later, a tall man with a sharp suit and an air of self-importance appeared. Mr. Walsh, the gallery's owner, had a reputation for his discerning eye and brutally honest critiques. He approached James with a look of mild irritation, clearly unimpressed by the young man's appearance. "You wanted to see me?" Walsh asked curtly, his eyes barely meeting James's. "Yes, sir. My name is James, and I'm an artist. I brought my portfolio to show you. I believe my work could add a fresh perspective to your gallery," James said, holding out his folder. Walsh took the portfolio with a sigh, flipping through the pages with a dismissive expression. The vibrant colors and intricate details of James's pieces seemed lost on him. Each painting depicted powerful narratives: children playing under the glow of streetlights, elders sharing wisdom on front porches, and abstract depictions of cultural heritage. But Walsh's face remained unchanged, his lips curling into a smirk. "This is interesting," Walsh said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "But it's not the kind of art we represent here. This looks more like something you'd find on a street corner, not in a high-end gallery." "Who exactly is your target audience?" "People who can't afford real art?" James felt a flush of heat rise to his face. "Sir, my art tells stories. It connects people. It's about emotion, history, and identity. I believe." Walsh cut him off with a wave of his hand. "Listen, kid. Art is about more than just passion. It's about status, exclusivity, and what sells. Your work, well, it's colorful, I'll give you that. But it doesn't belong in a place like this. Maybe try the community center down the block." The words hit James like a blow to the chest. He wanted to argue, to defend his work, but the condescension in Walsh's voice made it clear that his mind was already made up. Humiliation washed over him as Walsh handed back the portfolio with a patronizing smile. "Good luck," Walsh said, turning on his heel and walking away without another glance. James stood there for a moment, his hands trembling as he clutched his portfolio. The receptionist avoided his gaze, pretending to busy herself with paperwork. The rejection stung deeply, not just because of the lost opportunity, but because of the way Walsh had dismissed him, not as an artist, but as a person. As James stepped out into the cold, the wind biting at his face, he took a deep breath. The pain of the encounter was raw, but beneath it burned a fire of determination. He refused to let Walsh's words define him or his art. One day, James vowed, his work would speak for itself. And when that day came, the likes of Mr. Walsh would have no choice but to listen. With renewed resolve, James headed back to his apartment. He had a long journey ahead, but he was ready to face it head-on. Little did he know, this rejection would be the catalyst for a transformation that would not only change his life, but also shake the art world to its core. James's footsteps echoed through the narrow, quiet streets as he walked back to his apartment. The portfolio in his hand felt heavier than ever, each step weighed down by the harsh words of Mr. Walsh. The sting of rejection clung to him like the winter chill, and for a moment, he wondered if all his hard work had been in vain. Was he chasing an impossible dream? The thought lingered as he entered his small, cluttered apartment and placed his portfolio on the desk. Paintbrushes, tubes of oil paint, and half-finished canvases were scattered everywhere, but the space that had always felt like a sanctuary now felt suffocating. The next morning, James decided he needed fresh air to clear his mind. Wrapping himself in a warm coat and scarf, he made his way to a nearby park, a place he often visited to find inspiration. The park was quiet, its pathways dusted with snow, and the bare trees stood like silent sentinels. As he strolled aimlessly, he noticed an older woman sitting on a bench, her hands delicately sketching something on a pad. Intrigued, James slowed his pace, observing her strokes as she captured the barren beauty of the winter scene. "That's quite beautiful," he said hesitantly, stopping a few feet away. The woman looked up, her kind eyes crinkling as she smiled. "Thank you," she replied. "Are you an artist too?" James nodded. "I try to be. Though, after yesterday, I'm not so sure anymore." The woman closed her sketchpad and gestured for James to sit beside her. "Every artist has days like that," she said. "Tell me, what happened?" James hesitated, but something about her demeanor was comforting. He recounted his encounter with Mr. Walsh, the dismissive remarks, and the sinking feeling of inadequacy that had followed. She listened attentively, nodding occasionally, her expression one of understanding. "Ah, the gatekeepers," she said with a wry smile. "They think they hold the keys to the art world, but the truth is, the best art comes from those who refuse to wait for permission to create." James raised an eyebrow. "You sound like you've dealt with people like him before." The woman chuckled. "More times than I care to admit. My name's Margaret Carter, though most people just call me Mrs. Carter. I used to exhibit in galleries all over the country, but I've been retired for a while now." James's eyes widened in recognition. "Wait, Margaret Carter? The Margaret Carter? The one who did the Seasons of Life series? I studied your work in college." Mrs. Carter laughed softly. "Guilty as charged. But enough about me. Let me see your work." James hesitated for a moment before pulling out his sketchbook, which he always carried with him. He handed it to her, bracing himself for yet another critique. Mrs. Carter flipped through the pages slowly, her eyes scanning each piece with an intensity that made James nervous. When she looked up, her smile had grown. "You have something special here," she said. "Your work is raw, emotional, and honest. It tells stories that need to be told. Don't let one man's narrow-mindedness make you doubt that." James felt a lump in his throat. "Thank you," he murmured. "But how do I move forward? I feel like no one will take me seriously." Mrs. Carter leaned back on the bench, her gaze thoughtful. "The art world is changing, James. You don't need the approval of people like Mr. Walsh to succeed. These days, you have the power to connect directly with people who will appreciate your work. But first, you need to refine your skills and build your confidence. And if you're willing, I'd like to help you." James stared at her, stunned. "You'd do that? Why?" "Because I see myself in you," she said simply. And because someone once did the same for me. Over the next few months, James and Mrs. Carter developed a routine. Twice a week, they met at her studio, a cozy space filled with light and inspiration. Mrs. Carter's guidance was invaluable. She taught James how to experiment with new techniques, balance color and texture, and convey emotion through subtle details. More importantly, she instilled in him the mindset of a true artist, resilient, fearless, and unapologetically authentic. You have to remember, she told him one day, art isn't just about the final product. It's about the journey, the process, and the story you're telling. Let every stroke of your brush carry your truth. Encouraged by her words, James began to take risks with his art. He poured his emotions into his work, channeling both his struggles and triumphs onto the canvas. Mrs. Carter also introduced him to her network of fellow artists and collectors, opening doors that had previously seemed shut. Slowly but surely, James's confidence grew. At Mrs. Carter's suggestion, James started sharing his art online. He created a website and began posting his pieces on social media platforms, accompanied by the stories behind each painting. To his surprise, his work resonated with people from all walks of life. Comments poured in from around the world, messages of admiration, gratitude, and encouragement. One day, James woke up to find his inbox flooded with emails. A prominent art blogger had featured his work in an article titled "The Hidden Gem of Contemporary Art," and it had gone viral. Commissions began pouring in, and James found himself busier than ever, creating pieces for clients who valued his unique perspective. Through it all, Mrs. Carter remained his steadfast mentor, cheering him on and reminding him to stay grounded. "This is just the beginning, James," she said one evening as they celebrated his first major sale. "The world is starting to see what I saw in you from the start. Now it's up to you to keep shining." James nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude. The sting of Mr. Walsh's rejection was now a distant memory, replaced by the warmth of newfound success and the knowledge that he was on the right path. He still had a long way to go, but with Mrs. Carter by his side and a growing audience that believed in his vision, he knew he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. James's journey from obscurity to recognition was anything but ordinary. What started as a reluctant foray into social media, encouraged by Mrs. Carter, quickly became the catalyst for his rise to fame. At first, James had hesitated to post his work online, fearing it might get lost in the vast sea of digital content. But with her encouragement, he began uploading his paintings, pairing each piece with a heartfelt story about its inspiration. The internet, as it turned out, was the perfect platform for James's art. His bold colors, intricate details, and emotionally charged themes captured the hearts of viewers across the globe. Each painting spoke of resilience, culture, and hope, universal messages that resonated with people from all walks of life. Comments flooded his posts, with followers praising his work and sharing how deeply it moved them. "This feels like my story," one person wrote. "Your art reminds me of my grandparents," said another. The turning point came when a prominent art blogger, known for discovering rising stars, stumbled upon James's social media account. The blogger, intrigued by the raw talent and depth of his work, featured him in an article titled "The New Voice of Modern Art: James's Journey from Rejection to Revelation." The piece showcased some of James's best work, including his painting "The Keeper's Legacy," a tribute to the stories of his elders. Within days, the article went viral. James's social media following exploded, with thousands of people flocking to his page to see the artist everyone was talking about. Collectors and enthusiasts began reaching out, inquiring about his process and availability for commissions. His inbox, once a quiet space filled with rejections, became a hub of opportunities. Amid the buzz, a particularly life-changing email arrived. It was from Elizabeth Monroe, a world-renowned art collector known for curating pieces for museums and private collections. Elizabeth was captivated by James's work, particularly his ability to convey universal themes through a deeply personal lens. "I stumbled upon your portfolio online, and I was mesmerized," she wrote. "Your work tells stories the world needs to hear. I'd love to commission a piece for my collection, a centerpiece for an upcoming exhibition on cultural heritage and identity." James was both thrilled and nervous. This was the kind of opportunity he had dreamed of, but the scale of the project was daunting. Mrs. Carter, ever the encouraging mentor, reminded him of his worth. "You've been preparing for this moment your whole life, James. Trust your instincts and pour your heart into it." For weeks, James worked tirelessly on the commissioned piece. He poured his soul into every brushstroke, determined to create something that honored his roots and resonated with Elizabeth's vision. The result was a monumental painting titled Threads of Unity, a tapestry of vibrant colors and interconnected stories that celebrated diversity and the shared human experience. When Elizabeth unveiled the painting at her gallery, it was met with overwhelming acclaim. Critics hailed it as a masterpiece, and collectors scrambled to place bids. The final sale price was staggering, millions of dollars, and James was catapulted into the upper echelons of the art world. Despite his newfound wealth and fame, James remained grounded. He used a portion of his earnings to invest in his career, setting up a professional studio and expanding his reach. But he also gave back to the community that had shaped him, funding art programs for underprivileged youth and supporting initiatives that celebrated diversity in the arts. Meanwhile, the art world was shifting. Modern collectors and galleries began seeking fresh, authentic voices, artists who could connect with a younger, more socially conscious audience. The rise of social media as a platform for discovering talent further disrupted traditional models, leaving many established galleries struggling to adapt. Among them was Walsh & Company. Art Gallery. Mr. Walsh, once a kingpin in the local art scene, found his business floundering. His reliance on dated, elitist practices and refusal to embrace change alienated both artists and buyers. The gallery's walls, once filled with high-priced pieces from established names, now stood barren, as foot traffic dwindled and sales plummeted. Walsh scoffed at the idea of turning to social media, dismissing it as a platform for amateurs, but the world had moved on without him. Unbeknownst to Walsh, the artist he had so cruelly dismissed was now one of the biggest names in the industry. James's work was featured in prestigious publications, from Art Monthly to the New York Times, and his name was spoken with reverence in collector circles. Yet, James never sought revenge or harbored bitterness. Instead, he channeled his energy into creating, teaching, and uplifting others. One day, as James walked past Walsh's gallery, he couldn't help but notice how empty it was. The once bustling space, filled with affluent buyers and aspiring artists, was now a ghost of its former self. For a moment, James considered walking in, revealing who he was, and confronting Walsh with his success. But he decided against it. His journey wasn't about proving others wrong, it was about staying true to himself and his art. James's rise to fame was not just a testament to his talent but also to his perseverance and humility. With each painting he created, he told a story of hope, resilience, and the power of believing in oneself. And as the world embraced his art, James proved that the voices once silenced could become the loudest. Years passed, and James's name became synonymous with brilliance in the art world. His paintings hung in prestigious galleries and museums worldwide, and collectors clamored for the chance to own even a single piece of his work. But despite his global success, James remained rooted in the values that had shaped him. He poured resources into programs that supported budding artists from underrepresented backgrounds, ensuring they had opportunities he once lacked. One crisp autumn morning, while strolling through his old neighborhood, James found himself standing in front of Walsh & Company. Art Gallery. The building had not aged gracefully. The once pristine facade was faded, the signage dull, and the windows displayed uninspired pieces that seemed to reflect Mr. Walsh's stagnant vision. It was clear the gallery, once a symbol of exclusivity and prestige, was now struggling to stay afloat. A small smile crept across James's face. He had no intention of gloating or seeking vengeance, but the sight of the gallery stirred something within him. A vision began to form, a way to transform this once exclusive space into a beacon of opportunity for artists like him. With that thought, he pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped inside. The interior was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that spoke of empty halls and absent buyers. The few paintings on display were outdated, their price tags impossibly high for work that lacked soul. Behind the counter, Mr. Walsh sat hunched over, flipping through a ledger with a furrowed brow. His once confident demeanor had faded, replaced by an air of weariness. James approached the counter, his footsteps echoing in the empty gallery. Walsh looked up briefly, his expression indifferent as he scanned James's appearance. To Walsh, James was just another visitor, perhaps someone curious about art but unlikely to buy anything. "Can I help you?" Walsh asked, his tone flat and uninterested. "Yes," James replied calmly. "I'm interested in buying." Walsh perked up slightly, though his enthusiasm seemed forced. "Well, you've come to the right place. We have some incredible pieces available. Let me show you." "I'm not looking to buy a painting," James interrupted, his voice steady but firm. "I'm here to buy the gallery." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Walsh looked at James as though he hadn't heard correctly. Then, with a dismissive chuckle, he leaned back in his chair. "You're joking, right? This gallery isn't for sale." James didn't flinch. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the counter. Walsh picked it up reluctantly, his eyes widening as he read the name, James Carter, followed by the title artist and entrepreneur and the logo of a major art foundation James had recently established. "You," Walsh stammered, his face turning pale. Recognition dawned slowly, and the realization hit him like a freight train. "You're that James Carter? The artist? The one everyone's talking about?" "That's me," James said with a small smile. "It's been a long time, Mr. Walsh." Walsh's mouth opened and closed as he struggled to form words. The last time he had seen James, he had dismissed him as an amateur with no potential. And now, standing before him, was one of the most influential figures in the art world. James continued, his tone even but unyielding. "I came here years ago, hoping to share my work. You told me I wasn't good enough, that my art wasn't worthy of a space like this. But I didn't let your words stop me. Now, I see an opportunity to turn this gallery into something meaningful." Walsh's face flushed with embarrassment. "Look, Mr. Carter," he began, his tone suddenly deferential, "I may have been mistaken back then. But you have to understand, I was just doing what I thought was best for the gallery." James raised a hand, silencing him. "I'm not here to rehash the past. I'm here to make an offer. I want to buy this gallery and turn it into a space that champions underrepresented artists, those who are overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated. Just like I was." Walsh hesitated, clearly conflicted. The gallery had been his life's work, but he couldn't ignore its decline, or James's undeniable success. "And what happens to me if I sell?" he asked quietly. James met his gaze, his expression softening slightly. "You can stay on if you want. I'm willing to offer you a role in the new gallery, but under one condition: you'll need to embrace a new vision. This will be a space for all artists, not just those who fit a narrow mold." Walsh looked down at the business card, his hands trembling. He knew he had no real choice. The gallery was failing, and James's offer was the lifeline it needed. Swallowing his pride, he extended his hand. "Deal," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. James shook his hand firmly, sealing the agreement. As he left the gallery that day, he felt a sense of closure, not just for himself, but for every artist who had been told they didn't belong. This wasn't just a victory for James, it was a victory for the countless voices that deserved to be heard. In the weeks that followed, Walsh & Company underwent a complete transformation. The once exclusive space was rebranded as the Unity Gallery, a vibrant hub for artists from diverse backgrounds. On opening night, the gallery was packed with visitors, each eager to see the work of the next generation of talent. James stood at the center of it all, watching as his vision came to life. Walsh, now a humbled employee of the gallery, approached James with a small smile. "I have to admit," he said, "I didn't see this coming. But I'm glad you proved me wrong." James nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Mr. Walsh. I hope you'll use yours wisely. And with that, James turned back to the crowd, ready to celebrate a new chapter in his journey, and the beginning of something far greater than himself. The transformation of the gallery was nothing short of extraordinary. From the moment James officially took ownership, he knew this was more than a business venture, it was a mission. The Old Walsh and Company Art Gallery, once a symbol of exclusivity and elitism, began its metamorphosis into the Unity Gallery, a space that celebrated the richness of diversity and gave a voice to those who had been silenced for too long. James wasted no time assembling a team of like-minded individuals. He hired curators, artists, and art enthusiasts who shared his vision of inclusivity and who believed in the power of art to inspire change. Among them were several young artists James had mentored through his community programs, their excitement and creativity breathing fresh life into the once dreary space. The first major task was redesigning the gallery itself. James wanted the space to feel welcoming and alive, a stark contrast to the cold, sterile environment it had once been. Walls were repainted in vibrant colors, echoing the themes of diversity and unity. Large, open areas were created to encourage dialogue and interaction among visitors. James even set aside a section of the gallery for rotating exhibits that highlighted emerging artists, ensuring that new talent always had a platform. As the physical transformation unfolded, James worked tirelessly to recruit artists for the inaugural exhibition. He reached out to creators from all walks of life, painters, sculptors, photographers, and digital artists, whose work reflected a wide range of perspectives and experiences. Many of these artists had never been given the opportunity to showcase their work in such a prestigious setting, and their gratitude fueled James's resolve. Meanwhile, Mr. Walsh watched the transformation with a mixture of awe and humility. The gallery he had once ruled with an iron fist was becoming something he could never have imagined. At first, Walsh struggled to adapt to the new environment. He was used to calling the shots, and the idea of working under James was a hard pill to swallow. But over time, he began to see the value in James's approach. The energy, passion, and sense of community that filled the gallery were unlike anything he had experienced before. One day, Walsh approached James with a request. "I'd like to stay on," he said hesitantly. "I know I made mistakes in the past, but I want to be a part of this. I want to learn." James studied Walsh for a moment before nodding. "If you're willing to embrace the vision of this gallery and treat every artist with respect, there's a place for you here." From that day forward, Walsh became an unlikely ally. He took on the role of operations manager, handling the day-to-day logistics of running the gallery. Though it was a humbling experience, Walsh found himself learning valuable lessons about respect, equality, and the power of collaboration. James, true to his nature, guided him with patience, showing that transformation was possible for anyone willing to change. The grand opening of the Unity Gallery was a night to remember. The event was widely publicized, drawing art enthusiasts, collectors, and members of the community. The space was alive with color and energy, every corner telling a different story. Guests marveled at the diversity of the exhibits, which ranged from powerful portraits and evocative sculptures to immersive installations and digital projections. James stood at the center of it all, his heart swelling with pride as he observed the crowd. He saw young artists beaming as their work was admired, children exploring the interactive exhibits, and strangers engaging in meaningful conversations sparked by the art around them. This was the vision he had dreamed of, a space where everyone felt seen, heard, and valued. Toward the end of the evening, James took to the stage to address the crowd. The room fell silent as he began to speak. "When I first walked into this gallery years ago, I was told I didn't belong. That my art wasn't good enough, that my story didn't matter. But I stand here today as proof that no one has the right to define your worth. Every artist, every person, has a story worth telling. This gallery is a testament to that truth." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. The Unity Gallery isn't just about art, it's about people. It's about creating a space where we can celebrate our differences and find strength in our shared humanity. Thank you for being a part of this journey. The crowd erupted into applause, and James felt a wave of emotion wash over him. For a moment, he thought back to the young artist who had walked into Walsh's gallery all those years ago, full of hope and determination. The rejection he had faced then had been painful, but it had also been the catalyst for everything that had followed. He realized that every setback, every struggle, had shaped him into the person he was today. As the evening drew to a close, James wandered through the gallery, taking in the joy and wonder on the faces of the guests. He stopped in front of one of his own paintings, a piece titled Resilience. It depicted a lone figure standing tall against a storm, their feet firmly planted on the ground. It was a reflection of his journey, a reminder of the strength that came from believing in himself. James smiled, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. He had come full circle, transforming not only his own life, but also the lives of countless others. And though his journey was far from over, he knew one thing for certain: the best stories were yet to be written.